Today on Investigate TV, sacred ground. African American families fight to preserve their loved ones' burial grounds.
We're being devalued as a family. We're being devalued as a race. We're saying that, well, you're not important. Your gravesite's not important. Your history is not important.
With some people's history potentially already lost to the sands of time.
Everybody deserves a decent burial. You just don't throw a person away.
While others have stories of hope and solutions for preservation.
Here is what you get to see that Black people saw for themselves as free people. This is what dignity looked like.
Investigate TV starts right now. Hello and welcome to Investigate TV. I'm Lee Zurich. For many, visiting the final resting place of their loved one is cherished. But African American cemeteries across the nation face dangers of being erased, desecrated, or built over. It's a problem families tell us they've endured for decades. Caresse Jackman hears from some about the challenges they faced while fighting to preserve their ancestors' burial sites.
When you walk into the Oak Run Baptist Church in Thoroughfare, Virginia, it's like going back in time.
Our church was established in 1865. It was originally called Little Zion Church.
African American history, visible throughout the sanctuary. Frank Washington's indigenous and African roots both run through this town.
My family's connection with this town is probably deeper than most people in this area because we go back generations and we can prove our generational attachment to the county itself.
Part of his generational attachment lies here at the Fletcher Allen Cemetery.
How many people are buried here, would you say?
Right here, we're close to like 70, 75 people in this area here.
Some of them have their headstones marked. Others are marked by just stones, a common practice when enslaved Africans buried their family members. Names not written, but clear signs their lives existed.
These are usually the only identifying markers you would have for graves and from that time frame. There's either something like this or a smaller stone like that.
Not far down the road, Washington says another group of his ancestors lay buried.
The Scott Cemetery, which is on the other side of here, has 75 to 100.
But the final resting place of these ancestors is no longer in his reach.
We have a lack of respect for those that have gone before us. We have one cemetery that has been completely bulldozed.
Washington says the Scott Cemetery now sits beneath land owned by a brewery.
It's a cemetery that is documented. It's not some obscure thing that came about out of the blue. It's something that is established within the county records itself.
And our national investigative team found it's not a singular case. We found dozens of other cases where African Americans are consistently fighting to protect the land of their loved ones from construction and development. In Maryland, the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, or BACC, is currently in a legal battle with a private developer and Montgomery County to preserve the burial grounds where enslaved people are buried. What was meant to be the final resting place, now desecrated by excavators. It's a battle BACC's fought for over 8 years.
They paved a parking lot over it. That's on one part of the cemetery. The other part of the cemetery, they're trying to build a storage unit.
Robert Stubblefield, an organizer for BACC, says they're taking this fight as far as it can go, with supporters backing them in court. We reached out to the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County, Maryland, to comment on the case. They stated that a recent appeals court decision confirms it followed the law for burial grounds. They added that HOC acknowledges the significance of the African American history affiliated with this site and will continue to respect and honor this legacy in the community. Frank Washington's also in a legal battle with the brewery and the county's Board of Supervisors. But the brewery isn't backing down. The owner responded to our request for comment, saying in a statement that Washington's allegations are completely without merit and says the, quote, speculative gravesite underwent 2 extensive archaeological studies by professional firms, adding that Mr. Washington just can't accept the science, which revealed no presence of burial remains. Washington, who grew up in Thoroughfare his entire life, continues to argue the graves are documented, as illustrated in this historic research.
That same sense of devaluing for our ancestors And for those lying in those graves, is exactly how we feel now. We're being devalued as a family. We're being devalued as a race. You know, we're saying that, well, you're not important. Your gravesite's not important. Your history is not important.
The complicated web of tracking Black cemeteries is as complex as American history itself. Following the end of slavery, many African American families continue to face restrictions on where they can bury their ancestors. Across much of the U.S., local law segregated burial sites by race. African American burial grounds often fail to receive the same type of maintenance and record keeping that predominantly white burial grounds enjoyed. Fast forward over a century later, and the country's dark past makes discovering Black burial sites a challenge state and local governments face to this day. Every state in the country has cemetery laws, but they differ from place to place. In most states, violating cemetery laws and removing remains is a misdemeanor, but in some states, it's a felony. Permits are supposed to be filed if someone wants to legally remove remains if they're discovered, but InvestigateTV found that the permit process is hardly tracked for African American cemeteries.
When we were looking for how many Black cemeteries are there, are they protected, we found it very difficult to find out if state departments know how many cemeteries there are, if the cemetery laws are being enforced, how many permits were actually filed, if there were any at all. Is that the daunting task that you guys have found as well when it comes to actually making sure that these sites are preserved?
You can't preserve something unless you know where it is and what it is in most cases. Now, there are some sites, like archaeological sites associated with tribal cultural resources, that must remain confidential for a variety of reasons. But when it comes to cemeteries, when it comes to protecting those who have gone before us, it's important for us to understand where those are so that we can understand how to protect them.
Sarah Bronin also believes funding for sites and burial grounds is a necessity that is long overdue.
Federal agencies have not been blameless in the treatment of burial sites. As part of the federal government, the Advisory Council is hoping that by remembering the things that we have all done wrong in the past, by recognizing those wrongs, and by trying to create new policies and guidance going forward.
The bipartisan African American Burial Grounds Preservation Act, signed into law this year, establishes a program at the National Park Service to provide grants and technical assistance to research, identify, survey, and preserve these cemeteries. But we looked at the fiscal budget for 2023 funding and found $0 allocated this year. The National Park Service says Congress has the authority to appropriate funding for operating the grant program. President Biden's budget request for 2024 does include and proposes $3 million for this program. Stubblefield says this law doesn't go far enough.
But they were just talking about funding a lot of nonprofits that, quite frankly, do not understand African burial customs. They don't understand the importance of seashells, or the fact that a lot of burial grounds like at Moses or like Whispering Souls have like glass bottles, which bear significance to African religious customs.
He also says the act doesn't guarantee funding for community groups and descendant communities.
I don't care who's doing the desecration. You can be government employee, you can be private sector, you can be nonprofit. If you're desecrating a grave, you need to be dealt with accordingly. It goes back to a basic fundamental question. That question is, are Black people human?
This is my great Aunt Betty, and she used to sit right here in this pew every Sunday.
It's the same reason Frank Washington refuses to give up his fight. He says he won't rest until his community recognizes his family, remembers their history, and respects his battle to preserve them.
That regardless of what they've done, it's not going to change my belief in myself. It's not going to change the fact that I value who I am. It's not going to change the fact that I value those bodies lying in that grave. Whether I know their last names or not, I know they existed. I'm proof that they existed.
Stubblefield and the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition are currently collaborating with 70 other community groups, fighting similar battles nationwide. They plan to have a march this year called March for the Ancestors in Washington, D.C. to demand that Black cemeteries are respected.
Thanks, Caresse. You can stream this story and others from Investigate TV anytime directly on your television. Download our free app on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV devices today. Coming up, A complicated history. Property changeovers leave the fate of some loved ones' bodies in question.
Can you tell me, did you place our relatives in a mass grave, or did you actually come out here and make provisions for all 344?
That story coming up after the break. Welcome back to Investigate TV. The fight to preserve African American cemeteries has been a battle that Black Americans have faced for generations. One family claims that not only were their loved ones' remains moved without their permission, but they also believe the remains of more than 300 ancestors were improperly buried. Caresse Jackman examines their case and the preservation of burial grounds.
Willeen White Smith comes to this cemetery to reflect on her loved ones. But there's always a feeling of sorrow. Willeen says the names of her loved ones are nowhere to be seen on this land south of Atlanta.
We had family members over at Bethel Methodist Church. There was a cemetery there, and that they had to move the bodies because they were working on another project per se. And the bodies were moved over here to Carver Memorial Gardens.
Just how many bodies? Willeen says over 340 people.
Everybody deserves a decent burial. You just don't throw a person away. You know, can you tell me, did you place our relatives in a mass grave, or did you actually come out here and make provisions for all 344?
The history here is complicated and reflects property changeovers that we found happen across the country. Sales of land where African Americans and enslaved Africans were buried decades, even centuries ago. Stevens Industries bought the church property and cemetery in the 1990s. The company said it removed 343 remains from the abandoned cemetery site to Carver Memorial Gardens in 2009. Then completed moving 67 grave sites in 2017, when the company acquired more land and expanded.
There's 67 grave sites left that Stevens would like to move now, and let them join up with the rest that we've already moved some time ago.
The company asked the county's Board of Commissioners for approval and was given the green light both times to remove bodies after holding public hearings. Willeen's relatives pushed back, but ultimately were unsuccessful. And now the only sign the 344 people existed is this one headstone on the site, bearing the name of an old church. And even the church's name, Willeen says, is incorrect.
All we have been asking from Clayton County and anybody else that can shed some light on this is, where are the bodies of our relatives?
According to an archaeological report on the University of Georgia's website, the human remains and all associated grave items were placed in individual 31-inch boxes. When our team went to Carver Memorial Gardens, the new site, we asked the owner of Carver Memorial Gardens for documentation on the exact number of remains and plots moved to this location. She refused to give us any information. We tracked down the attorney for Stevens Industries, Crandall Bray, and asked him about the removal of the remains over the phone.
A lot of the graves were unmarked, but the architect, they've got a technique of how to find the graves, and they found them.
Bray also says the burial removal wasn't cheap, costing Stevens Industries over $500,000.
Did you all do everything in your power to make sure that these remains were preserved and protected?
To my knowledge, they did.
They did.
In fact, I believe they went beyond what was normal to do it.
It's not just Georgia. Viewers across the country have raised concerns about the way their loved ones have been treated in death. Based in Nashville, attorney Catherine Barnett travels the nation, representing families whose loved ones' remains were desecrated.
The legal framework is really complicated, so there's no federal statute that covers people's rights with regard to the remains of their loved ones and their ancestors.
When it comes to companies and corporations, or even just someone wanting to build or remove remains, why is it so common that some of them just don't follow the guidelines that are already in place?
Because they can, right? I mean, I think the sad thing is who will speak for the dead. So I think the reason why it happens is because, unfortunately, they get away with it a lot.
State and national databases identifying African American cemeteries are also poorly kept. But one of the states leading the way in collecting information on Black cemeteries is Tennessee. Graham Perry is the Historic Cemetery Preservation Specialist with the Tennessee Historical Commission. He helped create a Black cemeteries database for the entire state. So far, they've counted at least 720. Perry says funding is always an issue, but it shouldn't be an excuse not to collect the data and create a database.
The fact of the matter is, by having state recognition, we hope it can help cemetery groups, which by and large, I always encourage people to form groups, to take care of a cemetery instead of trying to do it themselves.
For Wileen, she wants not just a state database, but proof to truly identify if more than 300 bodies were properly buried here. Although her family's lingering question of where are the bodies has yet to be answered, Wileen will continue going.
Oh, no.
Fighting for answers, for her ancestors, and for the preservation of sacred ground.
Stevens Industries has since sold the property to another company. We also reached out to the lead archaeologist about the relocation of the graves, and we never heard back.
Scan the QR code on your screen now to watch full Investigate TV videos on our YouTube channel. While you're there, subscribe to stay up to date on the latest Investigate TV content. Up next, an example of enduring preservation. An Atlanta cemetery contains some historic names. How it's been maintained after the break. Welcome back to Investigate TV. While some African American burial grounds fight for preservation, there are some that have survived and thrived. Caresse Jackman continues her reporting with descendant communities of Southview Cemetery about how they've maintained its burial site for more than a century.
When it comes to the preservation of African American burial sites, one of the leading examples is Southview Cemetery in Atlanta.
Southview was started in 1886 by 6 men who were all born enslaved. One of those 6 men was my great-grandfather.
Winifred Hemphill, now president of the Southview Cemetery Association, wanted to follow in her family's footsteps.
Talk to me about what they did to set themselves apart.
Right. In 1886, without college educations, they decided to start the cemetery as a stockholder corporation. It's part of the community. It was not just their cemetery, so the community invested in it.
In the cemetery lie some of the community's most historic names: Martin Luther King Jr.'s mother, father, and brother, Hank Aaron, and John Lewis, just to name a few. But whether they're famous or not, the preservation of all the bodies at this historic cemetery is important to Hemphill.
How important is the preservation of our Black cemeteries?
Oh, so important. This is where Black history exists.
Dr. Michelle Haidt, professor at Spelman College and a board member for the Southview Cemetery, says it's important for people, especially descendant communities, to see that not only do African American historic cemeteries exist, but they can thrive.
This landscape, I talk about it as a landscape of freedom, because here is what you get to see that Black people saw for themselves as free people. This is what dignity looked like.
What are some short-term and long-term solutions? Say you are a family member and you're dealing with a battle over your loved one's cemetery. What are some long-term and short-term solutions that they can do?
Short-term, it could be, I've got to identify who are the people that I need to speak to. Long-term, it's here's what I think it'll look like when I'm satisfied.
Hemphill wants other descendant communities to see Southview Cemetery as an example that preservation is possible, and to not give up.
There are organizations that are forming to help support these groups, and finances is always important. There's grant money out there, hopefully, that will help to support them. But locating that gravesite and having someone to make sure that they understand that this is an important part of our history and of their history, that's the first step. We just have to keep trotting, keep going forward. I know that we get weary and we get tired, but we just have to keep going.
Hemphill also believes African American cemeteries need the government support to be properly maintained. Looking for more Investigate TV content online? Scan the QR code on your screen now or visit InvestigateTV.com. Coming up, another community bands together to preserve its history. How the unlikely discovery of an African American burial ground kickstarted a group effort. That story after the break. Welcome back to Investigate TV. More than a decade after power crews discovered an African American cemetery in disarray, a group of neighbors has made it their mission to make sure it's properly maintained. Emily Zahowski in Charleston, South Carolina tells us how the group hopes to honor the former enslaved people and their descendants buried there.
Between the houses on Sessionville Road on James Island is an area of green space. For years, it just seemed like overgrown brush.
I couldn't figure out what it was.
Angela Burgess, who lives nearby, realized that there were headstones underneath the vines and the weeds. She came to find out it was a cemetery for slaves and their descendants that was discovered just 13 years ago by power crews.
I decided that it was time for this place to be respected.
In February, Burgess got a group of neighbors together to start cleaning up the cemetery.
We started just chopping away, mowing, clipping things, the trees, and we just started pushing our way back until we started uncovering graves.
They've discovered 52 tombstones so far.
I know there's more. It's just trying to get to it.
The goal is for it to become a park-like spot where family members can pay their respects and maybe even become an established historical site one day.
If it was me and I was a survivor, I would just be mortified if I came to that cemetery and found it in so much disarray. So for me, it's just a way to bless whoever's here and show my love for the community.
For James Island native LaTanya Allen, whose parents are buried in a historic Black cemetery on James Island, preserving the cemeteries is a way to carry on the legacy.
Keeping the cemetery sacred and clean is a way that we can continue to pay back homage to our ancestors that have already passed away.
This is a way of honoring the past, looking at the legacy of those who were with us, but also how they have set a tone for our future.
Follow the latest investigations from our team on your favorite social media platform. We are at Investigate TV on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And that's it for us. Thanks for joining us here on Investigate TV. Hope to see you next week.